Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Thursday, November 9, 2023. White House spokesman John Kirby says that Israel has agreed to 4-hour humanitarian pauses each day in its attacks on Hamas in Gaza, and also to open up 2 humanitarian corridors to let Palestinians safely escape the war zone. In the U.S., Senator Joe Manchin, Democrat from West Virginia, announces he will not seek re-election in 2024, giving Republicans a good shot of picking up that seat. President Joe Biden travels to a Stellantis truck factory in Illinois that is reopening now that the autoworkers union strike has been settled. U.S. House and Senate have just over a week to come up with another temporary government funding bill or face a shutdown, and Republicans and Democrats starting to talk about whether any other policy riders should be attached to it. Biden administration announces that Greenbelt, Maryland has beat out Springfield, Virginia as the site for a new FBI headquarters. But Virginia politicians and the FBI director are raising questions about the selection process. And the Senate Judiciary Committee meets to consider subpoenas for a billionaire donor and conservative activist who are at the heart of a Supreme Court ethics controversy involving undisclosed gifts to justices. But the committee adjourns without action after Republicans threaten their own subpoenas concerning Democratic officials. A story from Reuters: Israel will begin daily 4-hour pauses in the northern Gaza Strip on Thursday to enable Palestinians to flee hostilities in the coastal enclave, the White House said, in what it called a step in the right direction. White House spokesman John Kirby announced the pauses and the opening of 2 humanitarian corridors in northern Gaza to allow Palestinians to seek safety from Israel's military operations. President Joe Biden told reporters as he left the White House he had sought a longer pause of 3 days. Asked if he was frustrated with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, President Biden said, "It's taken a little longer than I hoped." That was from Reuters. John Kirby made the announcement during a virtual audio-only news conference.
There will now be 2 humanitarian corridors allowing people to flee the areas of hostility in the northern part of Gaza. The first such corridor, opened between 4 and 5 hours every day for the past few days, has already enabled many thousands of people to reach safer areas in the south, away from the main area of ground operations. The second route, along the coastal road, will enable many more thousands to reach safer areas in the south. Of course, we remain concerned that Hamas will discourage or prevent civilians from fleeing. At the same time, when encouraging people to leave areas of active operations, it's critical, absolutely vital, that humanitarian supplies and assistance are expanded in the areas where people are moving, in this case, southern Gaza. Now, there were about 96 trucks 2 days ago that crossed in, and 106 trucks yesterday. We need to see more, and we need to see more soon, with an aim for no less than 150 trucks per day, continuously every day. That's the goal that we want to strive for. We are aware that there will be difficulties, and we all need to be prepared for the fact that there's going to be days where we don't make that goal, and hopefully more days than not that we do. But that's what we're setting as a goal. Second, returning to the issue of pauses. We understand that Israel will begin to implement 4-hour pauses in areas of northern Gaza each day, with an announcement to be made 3 hours beforehand. Now, we've been told by the Israelis that there will be no military operations in these areas over the duration of the pause, and that this process is starting today. Now, as we've said repeatedly, this is not our military operation. Israel makes its own decisions. It's fighting an enemy that is embedded in the civilian population, using hospitals and civilian infrastructure in an effort to shield itself from accountability and to place the innocent Palestinian people at greater risk. At the same time, Israel has an obligation to fully comply with international law, and we believe these pauses are a step in the right direction, particularly to help ensure that civilians have an opportunity to reach safer areas away from the active fighting.
John Kirby, Strategic Communications Coordinator for the White House National Security Council, opening up an online audio-only news conference. NBC News reports it is unclear how exactly these pauses will differ from current ones, which Israel has been implementing for the past several days. Israeli officials have said that the brief suspensions in fighting had been to allow Palestinian civilians in northern Gaza to move south. Shortly after John Kirby's announcement, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office said in a statement that the fighting was continuing and there will be no ceasefire without the release of our hostages. That reporting from NBC News. Ahead of the Veterans Day holiday in the United States this Saturday, today, a few Democratic U.S. House members joined an anti-war veterans group to call for an immediate ceasefire in the fighting between Israel and Hamas. They held a news conference outside the Capitol building in Washington. Summer Lee is in her first term in Congress representing Pennsylvania's 12th district.
Since Hamas murdered 1,400 innocent Israelis 1 month ago, nobody has questioned that Hamas must be held accountable. But let's be clear, it is innocent Palestinian civilians that are paying the price for crimes that they did not commit. Israeli airstrikes, the ground invasion, and forced starvation and dehydration has caused over 10,000 innocent Palestinian lives, including more than 4,300 children. Reports from the Israeli military indicate, we'll let that pass. It's DC, it happens. Reports from the Israeli military indicate that they have successfully targeted just 60 plus Hamas operatives. That means that the Israeli military has had a civilian casualty rate of 99%. 99% of the people who have been killed were civilians. They were mothers and fathers, grandparents and hospital workers and peacekeepers and teachers and community members and babies. People who are seeking refuge in churches and mosques and schools, people being transported or near ambulances. We can't afford to make the same mistakes that we made after 9/11, entering two endless wars for decades with no success. And all we have to show for it was an even more unstable Middle East and a loss of 4.5 million lives, including 7,000 service members. There will always be people who find who find warmongering profitable, whether it be politically or financially. But that's not what the majority of people in this country and our world want. They want a just and lasting peace in Palestine and Israel. They are demanding that our country change its course in unconditionally supporting a war that has largely been on Palestinian children.
Congresswoman Summer Lee, Democrat from Pennsylvania, on Capitol Hill, along with a couple of other House Democrats, Delia Ramirez from Illinois and Cori Bush from Missouri. They all support a Cori Bush resolution that was introduced calling for a ceasefire and delivery of humanitarian aid to the Palestinians. And they were also joined by anti-war veterans with a group called About Face. The Pentagon says that U.S. troops have been attacked 4 more times by Iranian-backed groups in the Middle East after the U.S. strike on Wednesday on an Iranian storage facility in Syria. Pentagon says 56 U.S. troops have now been injured in the attacks. 46 attacks by Iranian-supported military groups since October 17th, 24 attacks in Iraq, 22 in Syria, all using explosive drones and rockets. This came up today at the State Department briefing in Washington with the deputy spokesperson, Vedant Patel.
More attacks today on U.S. military bases in Iraq after the U.S. reaction yesterday in Syria. Any comment?
So, since you asked, Michelle, U.S. fighter aircraft conducted a proportionate precision self-defense airstrike in eastern Syria against one facility used by Iran's IRGC and affiliated groups. The IRGC and affiliated groups recently directed attacks on U.S. and coalition bases in Iraq and Syria. And as I have said from this podium over the course of the week, we will continue to take decisive military action to defend U.S. personnel in the region.
The State Department Deputy Spokesperson Vedant Patel at his news conference. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin put out a statement after Wednesday's strike by the U.S. that reads, "The President has no higher priority than the safety of U.S. personnel, and he directed today's action to make clear that the U.S. will defend itself, its personnel, and its interests." This is Washington Today. Senator Joe Manchin, Democrat from West Virginia, announced today he will not be seeking re-election in 2024. He has held his seat since 2010, and before that he was governor of West Virginia. CBS News writes that his retirement gives Republicans an opportunity to pick up a seat in the deep red state. Senator Manchin put out a video.
After months of deliberation and long conversation with my family, I believe in my heart of hearts that I have accomplished what I set out to do for West Virginia. I have made one of the toughest decisions of my life and decided that I will not be running for re-election to the United States Senate. But what I will be doing is traveling the country and speaking out to see if there is an interest in creating a movement to mobilize the middle and bring Americans together. To the West Virginians who have put their trust in me and fought side by side to make our state better, it has been my honor of my life to serve you. Thank you. Every incentive in Washington is designed to make our politics extreme. The growing divide between Democrats and Republicans is paralyzing Congress and worsening our nation's problems. The majority of Americans are just plain worn out. Our economy is not working for many Americans, from the rising cost of food and fuel and everything in between. We have a border crisis with illegal drugs entering our country and killing Americans every day. Our national debt is out of control, and Americans don't feel safe, even in their own communities. We are providing critical aid to two of our allies, fighting wars for their survival, and we must prevent being pulled into a major war ourselves. These are not Republican or Democratic challenges. These are American challenges. They affect every one of us, and we need to face them together. I know our country isn't as divided as Washington wants us to believe. We share common values of family, freedom, democracy, dignity, and a belief that together we can overcome any challenge. We need to take back America and not let this divisive hatred further pull us apart.
Senator Joe Manchin, Democrat from West Virginia, in a video announcing he is not running for re-election in 2024. He has been talked about as a possible presidential candidate, maybe with the group called No Labels that is exploring running somebody in 2024. Senator Steve Daines, Republican from Montana, who chairs the NRSC, National Republican Senatorial Committee, which raises money and supports Republican candidates for the Senate, putting out a one-sentence reaction: "We like our odds in West Virginia." And an Emerson College poll recently released found that two Republicans that were running for their party's nomination for Senate in West Virginia have different strengths against Senator Manchin in hypothetical matchups. Governor Jim Justice leads Senator Manchin 41% to 28%, but Congressman Alex Mooney loses to Senator Manchin 37% to 31%. And there are currently 6 senators who are not running for re-election in 2024. In addition to Manchin, the other Democrats, Ben Cardin of Maryland, Tom Carper of Delaware, Debbie Stabenow of Michigan, and 2 Republicans, Mike Braun of Indiana and Mitt Romney of Utah. And Senator LaFonsa Butler, Democrat of California, has announced she is not going to seek a full term in 2024. U.S. Senate and House have finished their legislative week. They're both out Friday for Veterans Day observed. Temporary federal government funding expires in about 9 days, midnight, November 17th. Today, the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer took the first procedural steps to set up a vote next week on a funding extension, and he urged House Republican majority to embrace bipartisanship and avoid what he called poison pills attached to that legislation. C-SPAN spoke this morning to Republican Congressman Don Bacon of Nebraska about what the new Speaker, Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, is planning.
Tell us what you would like your new leadership, Speaker Johnson, not to do.
Well, first of all, I know what he's going to do. He's going to submit a plan today, probably largely a straight continuing resolution. Maybe a debt commission will be put in there. Maybe perhaps some Israeli aid. We'll see. But he's going to submit a plan today, give us 3 or 4 days to read it and debate it, and we'll vote on it next week. What I don't want to see is something very complicated. We were talking about multiple CRs, a laddered CR process. I think it's just too complicated. We want to make this as bipartisan as possible, I believe, while we're working on the appropriations bills and trying to work a plan with the Senate for next year's spending. And so I want something simple. I'd like to be more bipartisan so we can work on an agreement with the Senate on next year's budget.
You want it to be more bipartisan. What do your more conservative colleagues want to see, and could you agree to that?
Well, some of them don't want to, they're not worried about a shutdown, which I think is wrong. Anytime you have a shutdown, you're affecting military pay, border patrol, all of our government workers, and it's not effective government, it's not appropriate government. But some of them think that's the only leverage they can get on the president for cutting spending. And I think it's wrong, because in the end, you have to give away stuff to reopen the government, and the president gets more leverage in a shutdown. But I think some of them would like to see maybe a continuing resolution with a 2% reduction in spending, or some kind of reductions while you're doing a 1 month or 2 month CR. Our goal should be to just get a CR, put in stability, while we're working on a good budget for next year, a conservative budget. Of course, we got to work with the Senate, and the Senate's controlled by the Democrat Party, so we can only do so much. But the real action should be on the appropriations bills for next year, not on the continuing resolution.
If Speaker Johnson comes up with a continuing resolution that is more appealing to those on the right of you and other moderate Republicans, do you think Speaker Johnson could get you and other moderates to vote for it?
Well, we want to keep the government open. My fear is if you get something that's too conservative, or reducing spending too much with a CR. We want to reduce spending in appropriations bills, frankly. But if you want to do this through a CR, my fear is the Senate won't take it up. We will have a shutdown. So we need to do something that's reasonable, that the Senate will also agree to, and the president. And then let's hash out our spending plan for next year via the 12 appropriations bills.
Congressman Don Bacon, Republican from Nebraska, on C-SPAN's morning program, Washington Journal. On the regular government funding bills, there are 12 of them. Today, the House adjourned without taking a final vote on a bill to fund the Treasury Department, IRS, Executive Office of the President, and Judiciary. Earlier this week, same thing happened with the bill that funds the Departments of Transportation and Housing. No final vote, presumably because, with virtually all Democrats expected to vote no, there were not enough expected Republican yeses to pass the bill. About a continuing resolution, a CR, that temporary funding extension, NBC News writes in a closed-door meeting this week, Speaker Johnson laid out 3 potential options for averting a shutdown. Attendees said a 2-step process favored by conservatives, where a handful of the spending bills would go on a CR through December 7th and the others on a second CR through January 19th. A relatively clean CR through January to give the House more time to finish passing their spending bills. And option 3, what leaders described as getting jammed by the Senate, negotiate best as we can. That from NBC News. Today, the House Minority Leader, Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, said at his news conference what kind of CR he would like to see.
In just a few days, the federal government is once again at risk of shutting down because extreme MAGA Republicans in the House are apparently determined to do just that. Unless they manage to extract extreme ransom demands related to their highly partisan policy priorities that have no shot of otherwise being enacted into law under the normal legislative process. To be clear, House Democrats are not going to pay a single right-wing ransom demand. We've not done it in the past. We're not going to do it today. We're not going to do it tomorrow. We're not going to do it next week. It will never be done. The only way forward is to come together in bipartisan fashion in order to meet the needs of the American people. And if Republicans are unable to do that over the next few days, then the only approach is to pass a continuing resolution at the fiscal year 2023 levels. Period. Full stop.
Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, the minority leader, at a news conference today. Again, the current temporary government funding runs out on November 17th. An article at WMAQ-TV in Chicago reads that President Joe Biden went to Chicago on June 28th to give a landmark speech on Bidenomics, only to learn in private during the trip about a soon-to-close auto factory, news that was a challenge to his vision for the country. The prospect of a shuttered Stellantis plant in the small city of Belvidere became an immediate priority for President Biden. He ordered up an economic analysis and spoke to company officials about the plant, according to White House officials. The president wanted to show that his policies could deliver for workers rather than repeat the decades of factory closures that had gutted parts of the Midwest and fed into a deep political divide. On Thursday, President Biden will visit Belvidere to showcase that same auto plant, which has reopened as part of the settlement of a targeted strike by the United Auto Workers Union. Stellantis, the maker of Jeep, Dodge, and Ram vehicles, agreed to hire back 1,200 employees to build a pickup truck and add another 1,300 workers for a battery factory. That was from WMAQ-TV in Chicago. Here's President Biden today at that plant.
These deals are game changers, not only for UAW workers, but for all workers in America. Just ask the folks at Toyota, which last week announced it would significantly finally increase wages for their workers. You had no choice. They had no choice because of what you did. You helped everybody. And look, I want to thank you for your commitment to the solidarity for exercising your right to bargain collectively. You made this happen. And it's by the way, it's a bigger thing I think even you all realize. You're changing the face of the country economically. I also want to recognize Ford, GM, and Stellantis. They negotiated ultimately in good faith. And as a result, all the workers will be rewarded. And the iconic big three are going to still lead the world in quality and innovation because of you. Yeah. Look. But I'm a little selfish. I want this type of contract for all auto workers. And I have a feeling UAW has a plan for that. The future of the automobile industry will be made in America by American union workers. And I see the future here in Belvidere. Belvidere Assembly Plant was the beating heart of this community for nearly 6 decades, just like it was back in Delaware, where I was raised. 8 months ago, the plant idled indefinitely. 1,200 of you lost jobs. When that happens, a community loses more than jobs. It loses a sense of pride, loses a sense of being, loses a sense of dignity. What do you turn and say to your kids? What do you say to one another? Everything changes. It's devastating. Then this June, I had a combination with Matt about from the local UAW, as he just described. He said, tell me, what's going on with Belvidere? He told me how critical it was to get that plant up and online again. So I told my team, make Stellantis know Belvidere is a priority. And I got on the phone and let him know personally I thought it was a priority.
President Biden at the Stellantis truck factory today in Belvidere, Illinois, wearing a red Union shirt emblazoned with "We Are Belvidere," given to him by the president of the local UAW Local 1268. President Biden also putting out a statement about the possible end of the actors' strike, with a tentative agreement announced between the movie and TV producers and the actors' union, SAG-AFTRA. It begins, I applaud SAG-AFTRA and Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers for working together in good faith toward an agreement that allows our entertainment industry to continue telling the stories of America. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell was a panelist today at the International Monetary Fund Annual Research Conference in Washington, talking about the strength of the U.S. economy. Here questioned by the IMF Research Department Director, Pierre-Olivier Gourinkas.
Jay, I mean, there's this incredible resilience in the U.S. economy that, Gita mentioned. We've had this decline in inflation and the economy seems to be powering ahead. Growth is really at a very high level. Consumption is very, very strong. There's this question about whether transmission of monetary policy is different this time around. Now, in your remarks, you've alluded to the fact that the sequence of shocks we've had is quite different from the typical business cycle. And so I was curious, and I would like to ask the same question to Amir, because in the context of the tightening of policy that you have done at the Bank of Israel, and maybe some of these resilience that Ken was talking about, building a stronger monetary policy framework, building reserves, et cetera, whether there is a sense in which the tightening operates in slightly different ways, there are longer delays, shorter delays. How do you view this from your own vantage point?
Go ahead. So I would say a couple things. Clearly, the U.S. economy has been stronger than expected. It's been more resilient, and this year is just remarkable, really. You know, so many forecasters had a recession this year, and it's nothing like that. It's going to be close to 2.5% growth this year. But that's probably, in my thinking, probably significantly a function of strong demand. I think monetary policy is generally working in the ways that we think it should work, which is interest-sensitive spending, asset prices, exchange rate. I think there are some aspects of the U.S. economy where you can argue that it's a little different, and that would be, for example, households who are in low-rate mortgages are not selling their homes, but they're also not feeling the effects of higher rates because they really don't want to get out of those mortgages. Same thing with companies. Any company that had access to fixed rate borrowing and didn't use that in the last 3 or 4 years would be facing, but there are very few companies that are in that. So it may be that the U.S. economy is structurally a little bit more resilient to interest rates, but I don't think that I don't see at this point anything that seems to be structurally or materially in the nature of a difference.
Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell at an International Monetary Fund conference in Washington, D.C. Wall Street today, the Dow down 220, NASDAQ down 128, S&P down 35. Labor Department says the number of Americans filing new claims for unemployment benefits fell last week by 3,000 to 217,000. Market Watch writes that claims still show a very low number of job losses and indicate the economy is stable, but businesses are hiring less and the labor market appears to have cooled off a bit. One complication is the UAW auto strike. It may have inflated claims lately. The U.S. Senate voted this week to overturn President Biden's decision to waive some Buy America requirements for federally funded electric vehicle charging stations, referring specifically to the $5 billion in the 2021 infrastructure law. The Senate vote was 50 to 48. The bill now goes to the House. The sponsor is Senator Marco Rubio, Republican from Florida, who spoke on the Senate floor before the vote.
The Biden administration, after passing this, however, didn't just fail to implement this provision. They were almost a year late in even issuing any findings on it, but they've now come out with this waiver. A waiver of that Buy American requirement that allows foreign-made EV chargers, translation Chinese-made electric vehicle chargers, up until October of 2024. But there's more. They actually give the Federal Highway Administrator the ability to extend that deadline by 5 years. And so we are now facing, under this waiver they're requesting, the real prospect that significant portions of the $5 billion that are going to go to electric vehicle charging stations are going to be spent on Chinese companies. Taxpayer dollars. So we're either serious about restoring America's industrial capabilities or we're not. We should be especially serious about it when we're spending federal funds on it. Now, I've watched some of the debate, some of the things the administration's telling people, about how somehow this is going to be the opposite effect. There's this 1983 general regulation that they've written, waiver that they have in place. Everyone knows here that specific statutory language, such as that exists both in this bill and in other law, supersedes any of these. But the other is very simple. The administration, as they've done with a bunch of other regulations, can either amend it or get rid of this. But they're using that as a threat. What they're basically telling people is, if you vote for this, if this thing passes, we will interpret that 1983 general provision to just do anything we want with regards to this. So it's pretty straightforward. Get rid of it. Don't use it that way. Commit yourself to rebuilding American industry and American jobs.
Senator Marco Rubio, Republican from Florida, on the Senate floor on Thursday. Senator Debbie Stabenow, Democrat from Michigan, spoke against his bill.
I just want to make it clear, as the person who authored the Make It in America Act in the infrastructure bill, which my colleague from Florida did not support, but we have a Made in America office now. And I am so appreciative of what the Biden administration is doing to make sure that we are not giving waivers unless absolutely necessary. We've had a general manufacturing waiver for years and years and years. What they've done is taken the EV chargers out of that and said, okay, we'll give you till July of next year. We'll phase out any kind of a waiver because we want these American-made. We want these American-made. And so the effect of voting for this resolution is to forever have EV chargers part of the waiver, where they never have to be American-made. They can always be Chinese-made. We want them American-made, and I urge a no vote on this resolution.
Senator Debbie Stabenow, Democrat from Michigan, on Thursday. The bill passed by a vote of 50 to 48. It was mostly party line, with Republicans voting yes and Democrats voting no. 3 Democrats voted yes: Sherrod Brown of Ohio, Joe Manchin of West Virginia, and John Tester of Montana. Also 1 independent, Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona, and 1 Republican voted no. President Biden has threatened to veto this bill, so even if it passes the House, overturning a presidential veto would require a 2/3 vote of both chambers. Washington Today continues in a moment.
People often think C-SPAN is funded by the federal government. In fact, we're a nonprofit organization that receives no government funding. As news consumption changes, you can help ensure the future of C-SPAN's unfiltered coverage of national government and politics. We hope you will consider making a tax-deductible contribution that will support our daily editorial operations. To learn more, visit cspan.org/donate.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you find your podcasts. An ABC News story: FBI Director Christopher Wray blasted the site selection process of the agency's new headquarters in Greenbelt, Maryland, and said there could be some potential conflicts of interest at play in its selection over a nearby Virginia location. The General Services Administration, the agency that oversaw the site selection process, announced Wednesday that it selected Greenbelt, Maryland as the headquarters for the FBI. The community, about 13 miles northeast of D.C., was selected over Virginia after years of the 2 states bordering the district duking it out for the new headquarters. The current FBI building, the J. Edgar Hoover Building in downtown D.C., is in desperate need of repair, according to the FBI. And this is the article from ABC News. It continues that Director Wray, in a memo to FBI staff, said the FBI has concerns about fairness and transparency in the process and GSA's failure to adhere to its own site selection plan, after he says a GSA senior executive may have tipped the scales in Greenbelt's favor. He said the FBI and GSA have worked together for months to find a location that is best for our workforce, the mission, and the American people. Yeah, that's all from ABC News. The White House Deputy Press Secretary Olivia Dalton was asked about this. The reporters joining the press secretary on Air Force One.
On the decision for the FBI headquarters to move to Greenbelt, Maryland, can you discuss anything about the president's involvement in that decision?
This was a GSA-led process. The GSA worked to implement their best practice around their site selection process. They also implemented came to a final decision based on site selection criteria that was in place in consultation between GSA and FBI from the outside, with input from outside stakeholders. I can tell you it was a fair and transparent process. The Greenbelt location was determined after reviewing that the 61 acres in Greenbelt is both the lowest cost to taxpayers, most transportation options for FBI workers, and we had the most assurances about the expeditiousness with which the project could get underway. So a lot of criteria there. For anything further, though, I would refer you to GSA, which has been really leading the process.
Olivia Dalton is the White House Deputy Press Secretary, speaking to reporters as they flew on Air Force One with the president. When the news broke Wednesday night that Greenbelt, Maryland had been chosen over Springfield, Virginia as the site for the new FBI headquarters, it's a multi-billion-dollar project which support thousands of jobs. Congressman Steny Hoyer, Democrat from Maryland, whose district includes Greenbelt, posted a video.
I am very, very happy, to say the least, that after 14 years of working to make sure that the FBI has the kind of facility necessary so it can carry out its critical mission for the country, both the safety of our citizens and the safety of our nation, has come to a place where The General Services Administration, composed of 2 members of the General Services Administration and an FBI representative, has selected Greenbelt in Prince George's County, Maryland, as the site for the construction of a headquarters that will suit the needs of the FBI and the nation. It's a great day for Maryland. It's a great day for the FBI.
Congressman Steny Hoyer, Democrat from Maryland, that video posted Wednesday night. A statement from both U.S. Senators from Virginia, Mark Warner and Tim Kaine, both Democrats, along with members of Congress of Virginia, both Democratic and Republican, and the Republican governor of Virginia, Glenn Youngkin, reads, "We are deeply disturbed to learn that a political appointee at the General Services Administration overruled the unanimous recommendation of a 3-person panel comprised of career experts from the GSA and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, concluding that Springfield, Virginia, is the site best suited for the new FBI headquarters. We have repeatedly condemned political interference in the independent agency-run site selection process for a new FBI headquarters. Any fair weighing of the criteria points to a selection of Virginia. It is clear that this process has been irrevocably undermined and tainted, and this decision must now be reversed." That statement from the Virginia politicians. That happened on Wednesday. Also on Wednesday, earlier in the day, before the location decision was reached, Congressman Matt Gaetz, Republican of Florida, offered an amendment on the House floor to the annual FBI spending bill that would prohibit the GSA from acquiring land to build a new headquarters.
The FBI wants a massive new complex for their Washington, D.C. area-based activities. They want to spend more than $300 million on that complex, though the FBI has an employee base that's about 2.3% of the United States military. Mr. Speaker, they're literally asking for something that is larger than the Pentagon for the FBI, and so my amendment would disallow any planning, spending, distribution of funds for that purpose. I don't believe that the FBI deserves a massive new headquarters or Washington field office. The activities inside of Washington, the greater Washington metro area, have really driven a lot of the investigative work we have done. It's not bad folks from the FBI out at some field office in Middle America or elsewhere in the country. It is the Washington, D.C. based activities that have pressured other field offices for no good law enforcement reason. It's the D.C. based entities that have suppressed credible investigative leads into criminal conduct over the objections of other bureaus and offices. And they've initiated investigations into American citizens merely for engaging in constitutionally protected speech. They've attempted to entrap members of the United States Senate by holding false classified briefings. That's testimony we got from Senators Grassley and Senator Johnson. They've also worked hard to censor factual information harmful to their preferred political candidates, notably the Hunter Biden laptop story that the FBI based in the D.C. metro area were involved in cajoling censorship of. Building a new headquarters would condone, reinforce, and enable the Washington field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation's nefarious behavior. We shouldn't do it, and we should adopt this amendment to ensure that's the case.
Congressman Matt Gaetz, Republican from Florida, on the House floor on Wednesday. Another Republican, Steve Womack of Arkansas, spoke in opposition to Gaetz's amendment.
We're not always going to hate the FBI. I realize there are people on my side of the aisle that don't like some of the activities of the FBI. I'm not going to pick an argument on that. But what I will argue is that it is bad policy for the Congress to be taking steps to deny a federal agency that is in serious need, in my opinion, of an improvement to their headquarters. Now, notice I said improvement. I didn't say some massive, big expansion necessarily. But what I do know is that when I toured the FBI headquarters, I saw it in a state of disrepair that is going to need the attention of the owners of that property. And that's us. And so to deny the FBI the opportunity to be able to explore other alternatives, I think, is a bit short-sighted. Give me an additional 30 seconds.
Additional 30 seconds.
Thank you.
Gentleman's recognized.
The fact is the building is crumbling, and there's going to be a need to do something. What that something is, I'm not an expert on. But I think it would be wrong for us to be taking this action today, pursuant to this amendment, without having at least a hearing and an opportunity for the people responsible for the facilities, FBI, GSA, any other stakeholder, to be able to help us understand what the situation is today and what the needs are of tomorrow. That discussion can take place, should take place, but I think it's a bit short-sighted and premature for us to be taking the action that this amendment would call for here today, and I yield back.
Congressman Steve Womack, Republican from Arkansas, on the House floor on Wednesday. The Matt Gaetz amendment failed on a vote of 145 to 273, with one voting present, 70 Republicans joining 203 Democrats in defeating it. The amendment was offered to the annual spending bill that covers the FBI along with the Treasury Department, Executive Office of the President, and Judiciary. That bill, though, has not gotten a final vote in the House yet. Story from Associated Press: Democrats on the Senate Judiciary Committee abruptly adjourned a meeting on Thursday without holding an expected vote on subpoenas for two conservatives who have helped arrange luxury travel and other benefits for Supreme Court justices. The panel's Democratic chair, Illinois Senator Dick Durbin, gavelled out after Republicans on the committee made clear they would call for subpoena votes on a raft of Democratic officials and others, a protest of the planned subpoenas for Republican megadonor Harlan Crow and conservative activist Leonard Leo. South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham, the top Republican on the panel, warned majority Democrats that the hearing would be contentious. That was from Associated Press. C-SPAN covered this meeting. Here is Senator Durbin.
My Republican colleagues claim our legislative efforts are motivated by my disagreement with the court's recent controversial decisions. But I first asked Chief Justice Roberts to address the court's lack of an enforceable code of conduct 11 years ago. And I'm not the only one. In 2021, Ranking Member Graham co-authored a letter with Senator Whitehouse to Chief Justice Roberts about enhancing financial disclosure requirements for all federal judges and Supreme Court justices. The letter encouraged the court to adopt an ethics code and noted that legislation may be in order, quote, if the court does not address the issue itself. 11 years after my letter, the country is still waiting for a code of ethics on the Supreme Court, even after story about lavish gifts and luxury trips that Supreme Court justices have accepted and refused to disclose. In order to inform our legislative efforts to establish an effective code of conduct, Congress needs to understand the full scope of the court's ethical crisis. This is the legislative purpose for all the committee's inquiries in this matter, including the subpoena authorization I'm requesting today. While several individuals have cooperated with the committee's investigation, Leonard Leo has refused to cooperate. Harlan Crow has refused to provide a complete response. This should concern all of us. Defending Congress's legislative and oversight authority should transcend partisanship. To protect Congress's authority and advance the committee's efforts to implement an enforceable code of conduct for the Supreme Court, I am now pursuing compulsory process with respect to two individuals who refused to comply with this committee's oversight request for months.
Senator Dick Durbin, Democrat from Illinois, Judiciary Committee chair at today's committee meeting. Senator Marsha Blackburn, Republican from Tennessee, spoke against the subpoenas.
I think we all know what this is about, and you all have been after Justice Thomas. We are fully aware of this. And I think that the whole charade is truly disgusting. Now, if we go back to the Dobbs leak, and I'm one of those, I'd like to know who the leaker is, and I'd like to know why they did it. But since that leak, our Supreme Court justices, especially Thomas, Alito, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, Barrett, they have been subjected to threats on their lives. Their families have been subjected to threats on their lives. And yet, this is what you and Senator Whitehouse are choosing to focus on, is a discrediting of the court. And we know what this is about. We should be talking about protections for the court. I think that it appears that what you're doing is you're going after them because right now you don't agree with some of the decisions that are coming out of the court. So instead of letting them exercise and fulfill their jobs, what they're required to do. What are you doing? You're going after a way to delegitimize the court as an institution.
Senator Marsha Blackburn, Republican from Tennessee, at today's Judiciary Committee meeting. The committee's ranking Republican, Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, used more colorful language.
Can't explain why you chose this fight. Things were going pretty well. We were voting on judges. None of us would have picked. I voted for most of them. Some people over here voted for others. Sort of the way it works. And now we're in a ditch. I mean, it's going to be a long day. We're going to get zero done. You're going to have a complete show. But if that's what you want, that's what you're going to get. So thanks.
Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican from South Carolina, ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, with Senator Graham promising that long day and lots of amendments with subpoenas for other officials, Democratic officials. Chair Dick Durbin adjourned the meeting, putting out a statement. Due to scheduling issues, we were unable to complete the markup today. We will continue our efforts to authorize subpoenas in the near future. The highest court in the land cannot have the lowest ethical standards. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter, word for word. It is free. And get the stories making headlines in Washington emailed to you every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.